Hi, my name is Judie VanKooiman, and you're watching Life Issues. This month's show is on T.A.P.S, and my guest is Derek Howe. Welcome, Derek.
Hi, Judie. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Derek, what is your title?
I am the president and lead instructor of T.A.P.S Consultants.
Okay, and what does T.A.P.S stand for?
T.A.P.S stands for Threat Assessment and Prevention Strategies.
Okay.
We're a workplace violence consulting company. We deal with everything from the workplace bullying incident all the way up to an active shooter incident, to include the active shooter type training. So that's what we really do.
Okay. And what is workplace bullying?
So workplace bullying is conduct that can happen either from another employee or from a supervisor or sometimes even the owner of the company, that is just can be very divisive to the workplace environment, and it can be very impactful to the employee that it's happening to.
Okay, which is kind of sad nowadays, to hear that word and stuff.
Yeah.
And why should we care about bullies in the workplace?
So, if you're in the workplace, if you're a business owner or you're a supervisor, you really want to be concerned about this types of behavior, because it's going to really affect the company tremendously, and it affects it in several different ways. Morale is always a huge thing. You want people to be happy and like the way when they come to work, and there's been some studies that have indicated that up to 50% of employees have been either victim or witnessed workplace bullying. So that's going to affect morale, and you want to obviously have the best type of morale you can for your workplace, because otherwise, what it also affects is your productivity. Somebody who's not happy at work, they're not going to be doing the best job that they can. You're going to start to see excessive absenteeism, because if they can't get away from their bully, they're not going to want to come into work.
Right.
The other thing you'll see is turnover. Eventually, they probably leave their job. And you don't want to lose good employees because you have one employee that is causing that to happen, even if it is a supervisor. The company reputation can take a hit, and particularly nowadays you have Glassdoor and all these different types of social media things that are rating companies. And if you have a former employee going on there and talking about how bad their experience was, that's going to affect your company. And your reputation is so fragile. You take such a long time to build a good reputation, and in an instant that reputation can be gone. Mm-hmm. And always, there's always the concern for lawsuits. If somebody were to say that they were working in a hostile work environment and sue your company, that would be obviously something you want to avoid as well. And then the workplace violence aspect of it, the bullying incidences can eventually lead to some type of violence, whether it's a physical assault or up to the the workplace, the active shooter type situations that we're seeing far too frequently nowadays.
Wow. Is it because of the mental health issues out there? And
I mean, sometimes there is some mental health issues, but typically what you tend to see with these workplace violence incidents is that somebody has gotten to a point where they kind of have a hopelessness or a helplessness attitude, and when people lose hope, then that becomes a dangerous situation. When they, like I said, when they've lost that hopefulness, or they feel helpless in a situation, and if they have a tormentor or a perceived tormentor at work, then they can take that out by actually coming in and doing some of these workplace shootings that you're seeing that do occur.
Okay. And what is hostile work environment for the federal law?
So I'm going to read off my little card
Yep.
here, just because,
Of course.
given the fact that it's a law, I want to be specific, because laws are very specific. But a hostile work environment under the federal law is when the conduct is so severe or pervasive that it is unreasonably interferes with the victim's ability to perform his or her job. And this involves harassment, and the Equal Opportunity Commission's definition of harassment would be unwelcome conduct that is based on race, color, religion, sex, to include pregnancy, national origin, age, 40 and over, disability, or genetic information. And those are all protected classes.
Okay. And then there's a law for our state, Massachusetts?
Yeah, and Massachusetts has its own law defining a hostile work environment. And in Massachusetts, they define sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, other verbal or physical conduct of a sexual nature that have the purpose or effect of unreasonably interfering with an individual's work performance. These actions create an intimidating, hostile, humiliating, or sexually offensive work environment. And that comes from the MCAD website. So those things are readily available online, the definitions, if someone were to be interested in, to see those.
Okay. And who's legally liable for harassment?
So the harasser is legally liable. People that witness the harassment and don't put an end to it can potentially be legally liable. And ultimately, the boss, the owner of the company, if it's a bigger company, your C-level, C-suite employees, the CEOs, CFOs, those types of things. And their liability kicks in when they either know of the conduct or should have known of the conduct. And, that's always with the catch-all. People like to say, well, I didn't know this was happening. Okay, but why didn't you know? Should you have known? And if you should have known, then that's where the liability is going to kick in.
Okay. And what is the average cost of a harassment lawsuit?
So to settle a harassment lawsuit, on average, and the figures that I had, the most recent figures that I've seen was the 2015 figures, and it's about $125,000 on average to settle a harassment suit. And if you were to take that to court and actually lose, it's $200,000 plus the attorney's fees. So again, depending on the size of your company, that can be that's a lot of money to hand out.
Exactly, yeah. And what are the most common types of bullies?
So typically, the way I see it is there's two types of bullies. You have what I call the loudmouth, and they're the ones that are they're the vocal ones. They're the ones that are at meetings and kind of putting people down, demeaning their work, but they're very vocal about it. They want to show everyone else that they're good, and part of the way they do that is by kind of tearing everyone else down to build themselves up. The other type of bully is what I call the backstabber, and they're almost even more insidious, and because you don't really know what's going on, but they're the ones that are going behind the scenes and either destroying work that you've done, the gossip and the rumor mill, those types of things. So those are, generally speaking, the two types of bullies that you see in a workplace environment.
Okay. And when does a bully strike?
A bully can strike at any time, in meetings. Sometimes, like the loudmouth, they're going to start putting down members of that team or their co-workers because they're in front of their boss and they're trying to make themselves look better, or like I said, sometimes that's done at the expense of someone else. One-on-one type situations, particularly this is where it becomes really pervasive to the work environment, is if it's your supervisor. If your supervisor is bullying you, then you're kind of in between that rock and a hard place. And those one-on-one instances, there's no witnesses, so those are kind of even worse. And then you have kind of the social atmospheres, and I don't know if actually anyone does this now, but what we would call the around the water cooler, kind of hanging out, talking about what you guys did over the weekend or whatever, and then because they have an audience, that's when they strike again.
Okay. And what is the group?
So in a bullying situation, when anything other than a one-on-one situation, the group has a lot of power, because what the group is it's all the people around the bully and the victim. And if the group doesn't say anything, then they kind of acquiesce to that bully's behavior. They're kind of saying to him, it's okay. And so they're giving him or her that power to be the bully. But they can also take that power away, because if they turn around and say, hey, look, man, that's not cool. You shouldn't say that about Jim or Bob, whoever. they're taking that power away, and they're showing him that, look, that type of attitude, that type of behavior is unacceptable in our work environment, and that will curtail their behavior tremendously.
Okay, and what is the superstar bully?
So unfortunately, sometimes you have, particularly if you have a small company or even large companies, you'll see there's the employee he's your rock star, he's your superstar, but unfortunately he's a bully as well. A good example of that is Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs, it was his company. He was the rock star. He's the leader, but a lot of people have said that he was very bullying to work for. So clearly, when it's the owner of the company, it's a problem. But if the boss sees an employee that's their rock star as the bully, then the boss eventually has to ask himself, at what cost? Because he may be, your big earner or your big sales guy, or you're the smartest person on your, working that project. But if you end up losing employees, your reputation, lawsuits, is it worth that baggage?
Right. Okay. And what would a boss's responsibility be?
So a boss's responsibility is when they find out that there's an incident, they have to do something about it. If they witness the incident, then they need to stop the incident right away and then kind of dig a little bit deeper, figure out, is this something that's been ongoing? Was this a one-off type incident, or is this pervasive behavior? And if it's pervasive behavior, one of the things that they'd really want to do is probably, and it's always going to depend on the size of the company, but it's always better to have an independent party come in and do that type of investigation, because then there's no sense of biasness. But you're going to want to investigate those activities to see where you're at, and then take the appropriate actions, which again could always be just a verbal discussion where you counsel the guy and tell the employee, the bullier, look, that's unacceptable behavior. We don't do that here. We have zero tolerance. If you don't change your behavior, then we're probably going to look to terminate. Or if the behavior was so egregious, then maybe you're going to terminate right away. But that's what the boss's responsibility would be. And you want to, the other thing is you really want to document that. You got to document everything you do, because if you're ever brought into court over something, if you didn't document it, it didn't happen.
Right, exactly. And what do you say about having respect in the workplace?
So, some of the attorneys that I've spoken with have said that it's really a good idea to have put in your employee handbook that employees will be respectful of one another. And the reason for that is that sometimes the conduct that they're showing isn't criminal, it's not civil, it doesn't rise to that level. But if you want to be able to correct them on something and kind of hold their feet to the fire, if you have a handbook violation, that's something you can kind of hold over them. And so that's one of the reasons why you'd want to have respect in your workplace employee handbook. Okay.
And the logo for T.A.P.S has a meaning to it. Can you tell us what that is?
It does, yes. So it is a Norse rune, and it's called the Vigvisir. And what it is a Norse compass. And back in the day, Norse fishermen and the Vikings would take these out when they were out at sea, because it was the hopes would be that you would never get lost, no matter how bad the storm was. And so we chose that design because we wanted to be that compass for corporations or workplaces that we want you to be able to, when you're weathering the storm, we want to be able to help you through that storm, because these are serious issues, and they're tough, and you don't always want to go that alone, because sometimes you see something and when you're involved in it, you only see it from one perspective, and when somebody from the outside comes in and can look at things, they can widen that perspective, maybe make you look at things at a different way. So that's one of the reasons why we went with the or actually that's the reason why we went with the Vigvisor.
That's very interesting. Thank you for sharing. You mentioned earlier at the beginning of the show about active shooting training that you also do, and we've talked a lot about people being bullied in the workplace. But can you talk about the active shooting training that you do?
Sure. So the national model at this point is kind of off of the run, hide, fight training, and basically what that is that if you have a situation where, and we've called it active shooter, there's a movement on to just call it active killing, because now you're seeing the incidences with the knives or the the people in vehicles and stuff like that. You try to figure out the proper response, and if you don't think about these things, when a traumatic situation happens, typically you're going to do one of three things. We call it the 3 Fs: fight, flight, or freeze. And it used to be thought that with an adrenaline dump you'd get the fight or flight response, and for years I've always said that there's a freeze component, because it's kind of like that deer in the headlights type of thing. Some people just don't know what to do and they just stop. Their mind has a hard time processing that information. So we want people to try to get past that fight or flight or freeze response as quickly as possible, and recognize that they're in a very dangerous situation, and you want to recognize that, because there's a thing called normalcy bias, and if you're in your workplace and all of a sudden you hear gunfire, you're going to say, what was that? I mean, first of all, how many people have heard gunfire? And second of all, you're at work. Why would there be someone shooting a gun? So until you can get to the point where you're like, oh my God, this is dangerous, you're not going to respond appropriately. You've seen instances before where they hear something and now people are coming out of their offices, they're looking around. That's the time that you need to acknowledge what it is for what it is, and take steps to get away from that area. And that's where the run, hide, fight comes in. We want people the best way not to get hurt in an incident is not to be in that incident. So if you can, run like crazy and get away. But that's not always an available response, because if that person's right outside your office door, or the hallway that you would need to exit is there, then you got to look at the hiding aspect. And we don't mean passively hiding, because you don't want to just hide under your desk and say, oh, I hope this goes away, because that's not productive. You're going to want to hide in a way that is beneficial. You want to fortify your area if you can. If you happen to be in a conference room or you have an office with a door that locks, you want to take steps to really fortify that area. And then, and I also think that there's a hybrid of this is that sometimes you're going to hide until you get the chance to run. And then lastly, there's the fight component. And clearly we don't want people to fight if they don't have to. But, if it's one person and you're in a conference room with like 4 or 5 other people, you actually stand a better chance to defend yourself than just standing against the wall and let this guy come in and shoot. So if you can turn around and make a plan with somebody, hey, look, get on either side of the door, I'm going to go high, you go low, you grab the weapon, and you might be able to disarm this person and subdue them for law enforcement to show up and stop the act of killing. And, nationally speaking, the average law enforcement time on scene is roughly 3 minutes. And 3 minutes is a long time. Mm-hmm. And the statistics that are out there right now is roughly every 15 seconds is a body. So 3 minutes, you do the math, that's a fair amount of bodies. So we want people to take responsibility for their safety and essentially do one or several of those options of either the running, hiding, or fighting. And one of the other things that we talk about in the training is it's very important that when law enforcement does get on scene, we recognize the fact that they're going to be scared, but they also have to recognize the fact that law enforcement is coming into this kind of blind. They don't know who the shooter is. So they need to be listening to the commands that law enforcement are going to be giving them as they come through the scene. And the other thing I always tell people is, if you do end up fighting the individual and you disarm them, don't be holding the gun when law enforcement shows up, because that would be very dangerous.
Yeah, exactly.
If you can, we try to tell people, like, if there's a trash barrel in the office or something like that, put the gun in the trash barrel and hold the trash barrel that way, or something, just so that as law enforcement gets on scene, they don't recognize the firearm right away, because that's going to be dangerous.
Right. Now, between workplace active shooters and now we hear more and more nowadays about schools, about kids being active shooters and going through schools. Is the training different, or do you work with teachers and students?
No, the training is roughly the same. A lot of the country has gone to the ALICE component, which ALICE is an acronym that stands for Alert, Lockdown, Inform, Counter, and Evade. And the tough part for the schools is we're dealing with kindergartners all the way up to young adults. And clearly they can do different things, more so than others. So, from a kindergartner, first, second graders, we don't want them to counter. We don't want them to have to try to fight, because that's just not realistic. At the same time, what we learned as we've progressed through this kind of ridiculous national tragedy that we were experiencing is that after Columbine, which was kind of a watershed moment for law enforcement, law enforcement had never really dealt with an active shooter prior to that. And the training had been for what they did in Columbine was they went to their training for a barricaded subject. And that was to set up a perimeter, wait for SWAT to arrive, and they deal with it. Well, you can't wait for someone to arrive with an active shooter. So the first step in our progression was to just do school lockdowns. And what we figured out is that when they lock down, if the suspect breaches that room, they just have sitting ducks there. So if we can get them to vacate the area and leave and evacuate, that's, like I said, the best way not to get hurt in a situation is not to be in that situation. So that's why we're trying to give the teachers and the students these various options. But like I said, because of the different age levels, you have to kind of tailor that to what they can do, both mentally and physically. So that is what, from a school standpoint, we're seeing roughly that most of the nation has gone with the ALICE protocol.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. Derek, if anyone has any questions or would like more info, can you please give us your contact info?
Sure. So my email is my first initial D and my last name, Howe, H-O-W-E, at tapsconsultants.com. Okay. And which is also the website, which is www.tapsconsultants.com.
Okay. And we'll have it up on the screen for our audience too. So it'd be great. I'm sorry, but that's all the time that we have. Thank you, Derek, for bringing all this important information to our audience. I love to hear your thoughts and suggestions. Please send them to lifeissuestv@gmail.com. And remember, live each day to the fullest and celebrate life.
In a major national survey, 35% of American adults reported that they have experienced bullying behaviors at work, and another 15% said they have witnessed others being bullied. Workplace bullying can have serious repercussions for the employees and the organization alike. Severely bullied workers may suffer a variety of health consequences, including depression and anxiety disorders. Bullying can also diminish productivity and morale and lead to higher absenteeism and turnover. It can even increase employee benefit costs and the risk of legal action. On occasion, resulting bad publicity can tarnish the organization's reputation. Workplace bullying may be direct, such as repeated yelling and verbal humiliation, hostile glares, or silence and deliberate exclusion. Or it may be more indirect, such as behind-the-back sabotage, spreading damaging rumors, or imposing unreasonable work demands designed to make the target fail. Supervisors are the most frequent aggressors, followed by peers. In instances of mobbing, employees gang up to bully a coworker. Prevention is key for any organization. It starts with leaders who encourage mutual respect in the workplace and send a message that bullying and similar behaviors will not be tolerated. Organizations should educate their employees about workplace bullying and create a policy and procedures for addressing reports of bullying fairly and promptly. Consultation with legal counsel may also be advisable to ensure that liability concerns are adequately addressed. By promoting a psychologically healthy workplace and taking steps to prevent and address negative workplace behaviors, employers can create a work environment where employees and the organization thrive.